On November 7, 2024, at 14:32 hours Coordinated Universal Time, NASA flight engineer Travis Holloway was running a routine diagnostic on the International Space Station's thermal control systems when he discovered something that should not exist. Travis, 41 years old, 15 years with NASA, 3 previous long-duration missions totaling 618 days in orbit, former Navy aviator with a master's degree in aerospace systems engineering from MIT, was the kind of person who noticed when things didn't add up. And the file he was looking at didn't add up at all. The diagnostic had pulled up telemetry logs from the station's cooling loop subsystem, standard maintenance protocol he'd performed dozens of times. But nested inside the routine data stream was an attachment that had no business being there. A PDF file, timestamp showing it was uploaded to ISS servers on October 19, 2024, just 19 days earlier. The file name read, Sentinel Bioencounter Protocol 1958, classified.pdf. File size, 47 megabytes. Classification marker, confidential. No foreign. Originally top secret. Travis felt his pulse tick up slightly, the kind of physiological response astronauts are trained to notice and control. He glanced at the timestamp again. 1958, the year Explorer 1, America's first satellite, launched into orbit. January 31st, 1958, to be exact. But this document was dated December 9th, 1957, 8 weeks before the official start of the American space program. The document's header showed Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, not Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, which wouldn't exist for another 62 years. Air Force Station. The military controlled it then. The signature line read, Vernon S. Huxley, Ph.D., Chief Scientist, United States Air Force Space Medicine Division. Travis had never heard the name. He'd studied aerospace history extensively, knew the major players, the pioneers, the names that made it into textbooks. Vernon Huxley wasn't among them. The title alone was impossible. Project Sentinel, Biological Encounter Protocol and Post-Recovery Analysis. Biological Encounter. In 1957, before any nation had successfully placed a living organism into orbital space. The Soviets sent Laika, the dog, up on Sputnik 2 on November 3, 1957. But she never came back. She died in orbit within hours. No recovery. No analysis. So, what biological encounter was the United States Air Force documenting a month later, 8 weeks before America even had the capability to reach space? Travis checked the station's communication logs. No scheduled data uploads from Houston. No file transfers logged for October 19th. The document had appeared in the system with no record of transmission, no originating IP address, no human input. As if it had simply materialized inside the ISS computer network, 408 kilometers above Earth's surface. He knew the protocol. Classified documents found in unclassified systems trigger automatic security alerts. The file should have been flagged, quarantined, deleted, or, more likely, never uploaded at all. ISS computer systems have multiple redundant firewalls specifically to prevent classified material from contaminating operational networks. But here it was. 47 megabytes of Cold War-era documentation about something that officially never happened. Travis glanced at the mission clock. His crewmates, Japanese astronaut Kenji and ESA mission specialist Astrid, were both in the Japanese experiment module running combustion experiments. He had maybe 20 minutes before the scheduled comm window with mission control in Houston. He made a decision that would, though he didn't know it yet, change everything he thought he understood about why humans went to space in the first place. He copied the file to his personal storage drive, the one NASA issued for crew photos and personal emails. 47 megabytes downloaded in 11 seconds. Then he opened the document. The first page loaded. Typewriter text, slightly faded. The characteristic uneven pressure of manual keys. Top right corner. A stamp reading declassified with a date, June 12, 2023. Just 17 months ago. 66 years after it was written, someone had decided this document could finally see light. Travis started reading. By the third paragraph, his hands had gone cold in the station's climate-controlled 72-degree environment. By the end of the first page, he understood why Vernon S. Huxley's name never made it into any history book. Some knowledge, it seemed, was designed to be forgotten. The report began with clinical precision, the kind of language scientists use when documenting something they don't fully understand but need to record for posterity. Vernon Huxley wrote in the methodical style of a man trained to observe, measure, and report without interpretation. But even through the sterile scientific prose, Travis could sense something else beneath the words. Fear, maybe. Or the kind of profound disquiet that comes from witnessing something that rewrites fundamental assumptions about reality. Travis waited until his scheduled sleep cycle at 0300 hours Greenwich Mean Time to read the full document. The station was quiet, just the ambient hum of ventilation systems and the occasional creak of thermal expansion as the structure moved through darkness and sunlight every 90 minutes. He floated in his sleep station, tablet screen casting pale blue light across his face, and read what Vernon Huxley had documented 67 years earlier. The mission was designated Sentinel-0. Launch date, December 9, 1957, at 2200 hours local time from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, Launch Complex 5. The same pad that would later launch the first Mercury missions, but in December of '57, it was still strictly military territory. The payload was a modified Vanguard rocket, the same design that would famously fail on national television just 11 days later. But this one had been reconfigured for a single purpose that had nothing to do with the peaceful exploration of space that President Eisenhower would announce to the world 2 months later. This was a weapons platform test. At least, that's what the official paperwork said. The biological payload consisted of 3 rhesus macaques, each weighing between 12 and 14 pounds, fitted with telemetry harnesses to monitor heart rate, respiration, neural activity, and core body temperature. The capsule was designed for a suborbital trajectory reaching an apogee of 115 miles, well into what would later be defined as the Kármán line, the official boundary of space. But the trajectory data Vernon included showed something different. The capsule achieved stable orbit at 114 miles altitude, completing 2.5 full orbits over 41 hours and 17 minutes before retrofire brought it down in the Atlantic Recovery Zone, 230 miles southeast of Bermuda. Vernon documented the recovery with the same clinical detachment. Navy divers reached the floating capsule at 1400 hours on December 11th. Interior temperature, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Cabin pressure, 14.7 pounds per square inch, identical to sea level. All 3 primates were alive. Cardiac telemetry showed normal sinus rhythm. Respiration, 12 breaths per minute, within expected parameters. But the animals weren't moving. Not paralyzed in the medical sense, Vernon clarified. Their muscles responded to electrical stimulus, reflexes intact. But voluntary motor control appeared suppressed, as if something had temporarily disconnected intention from action. The neural telemetry was where things stopped making sense. All 3 animals showed identical brainwave patterns. Not similar, identical. Perfect synchronization across theta, alpha, and beta frequencies. Vernon wrote, "In 22 years of neurological research, I have never observed pattern concordance of this magnitude between separate organisms. The probability of 3 distinct nervous systems exhibiting identical electrical activity spontaneously approaches 0. This suggests external coordination or shared neural state through mechanism currently unknown to science." But it was the next section that made Travis's breath catch in his throat, even in the weightless environment of the ISS, where breathing is always slightly labored. Vernon's handwriting became less precise here. The typewriter keys struck harder, creating darker impressions on the page. The section header read, "Anomalous Biological Specimen. Preliminary Observations." When the recovery team opened the capsule, they found 4 living organisms inside, not 3. The 4th specimen measured approximately 8 inches in length, bilateral symmetry consistent with complex multicellular life, but morphology unlike any terrestrial phylum. Vernon's description was exact. No visible digestive tract, no excretory organs, no respiratory structures, no circulatory system that matched any known anatomy. The surface tissue appeared semi-translucent, described as having the consistency of cartilage, but with an underlying structure that seemed to shift when observed directly, as if the organism existed slightly out of phase with normal matter. Vernon collected tissue samples. The cellular structure showed no nucleus, no mitochondria, no recognizable organelles. The cells, if they could be called cells, appeared to generate energy through a process that didn't involve chemical bonds or electron transfer. 3 separate laboratories analyzed the samples independently. All 3 reached the same conclusion. The specimen's biology operated on principles that contradicted every established model of how life sustains itself. 2 days after recovery, Base Commander Clarence Drummond, a full bird colonel with direct authorization from Strategic Air Command, ordered complete destruction of all physical evidence. The specimen was incinerated at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 6 continuous hours. The 3 primates were euthanized and cremated. Every instrument that had contacted the capsule was smelted. Vernon's laboratory notes were confiscated. He was placed under military custody for 72 hours, then released after signing a non-disclosure agreement that carried penalties, including life imprisonment, for violation. But Vernon had kept one thing: this report, hidden somewhere for 66 years until someone decided, just 17 months ago, that it could be declassified. The question that Travis couldn't answer, the one that made his pulse quicken despite years of training to stay calm in crisis situations, was simple. If they destroyed everything, if they buried this so deep that even the scientist who witnessed it disappeared from history, why did this document survive? And why had it appeared in the ISS computer network now, on a random Tuesday in October, attached to a routine systems diagnostic, like a message in a bottle thrown across 7 decades of silence? Travis scrolled to the final page. There was one more section, an appendix, and the header made everything suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Audio transcript. External signal intercept. December 10, 1957. 0400 hours Universal Time. Someone had been listening, and something had been talking back. The appendix detailed something that shouldn't have been possible with 1950s technology, and yet the technical specifications were too precise to dismiss as fabrication. The Jodrell Bank Observatory in Cheshire, England, had gone operational just 4 months earlier in August of 1957, housing what was then the largest steerable radio telescope in the world, a 250-foot dish designed primarily to track Soviet satellites and study cosmic radio sources. On December 10, 1957, at 0400 hours Universal Time, observatory operator Delbert Finch detected an anomalous signal while conducting routine monitoring of radio frequencies in the 1,400 to 1,500 MHz range. Vernon's report included Finch's original transmission log, transcribed word for word. The British operator noted a series of rhythmic pulses, duration of 4 minutes and 17 seconds, centered at 1,420 MHz. That frequency would become significant 2 decades later, when the Ohio State University Big Ear radio telescope detected the famous WOW signal at precisely the same wavelength, the hydrogen line, the most abundant element in the universe, and the frequency that any civilization attempting communication across interstellar distances would logically choose. But in 1957, no one was looking for alien signals. They were looking for Soviet rockets. What made Finch's detection extraordinary wasn't just the frequency. It was the source location. The signal originated from coordinates in low Earth orbit matching the trajectory of Sentinel-0, but not from the capsule itself. The pulses came from a position approximately 400 meters away from the capsule, maintaining perfect orbital synchronization. No known object occupied that space. No debris, no second satellite, nothing on any tracking system. Yet something was there, broadcasting in a mathematical pattern that Finch immediately recognized as non-random. The pattern was a Fibonacci sequence: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. Each number represented by the corresponding number of pulses, then a pause, then the next number in the sequence. The transmission repeated this pattern exactly 17 times over the 4-minute duration, then ceased abruptly. Vernon's analysis noted something that made Travis's skin prickle despite the station's controlled climate. The signal occurred exclusively during the portion of Sentinel-0's orbit, when the capsule was on the dark side of Earth, completely out of direct line of sight with any ground-based tracking station. The moment the capsule's trajectory brought it back into radio contact with Cape Canaveral, the mysterious transmission stopped. Not faded. Not degraded. It simply ended, as if whoever or whatever was broadcasting understood precisely when human observation became possible again. Travis cross-referenced the orbital mechanics data Vernon had included. The Sentinel-0 capsule completed 2.5 orbits over its 41-hour flight. The trajectory took it over the South Atlantic 3 times, passing through coordinates that corresponded almost exactly to what modern astronauts knew as the South Atlantic anomaly, a region where Earth's magnetic field dips closer to the surface, allowing higher levels of radiation to penetrate. But here was the critical detail that Vernon had highlighted in red ink on the original document. The South Atlantic anomaly didn't exist in 1957. Travis pulled up current radiation maps on his tablet, data that every ISS crew studied because the anomaly represented the most dangerous part of their orbit, where radiation exposure spiked and sensitive electronics sometimes glitched. The anomaly appeared on NASA radiation maps starting in June of 1958, exactly 6 months after the Sentinel-0 mission. Before that, historical records showed normal magnetic field strength in that region. Something changed. The planet's magnetic field developed a permanent weakness in the exact coordinates where an unknown source had broadcast a Fibonacci sequence at a capsule carrying 3 unconscious primates and 1 impossible biological specimen that violated every known principle of life. Vernon's final note in this section was a single handwritten sentence, the ink slightly smudged, as if he'd been writing quickly. Signal duration and capsule's dark side transit time correlate to within 0.3 seconds. This suggests real-time positional awareness and deliberate communication strategy designed to avoid terrestrial detection. Conclusion: broadcast source possessed both technological capability and tactical intelligence regarding human observation limitations. Travis checked the mission clock. 0432 hours. He'd been reading for 90 minutes. His next scheduled comm window with Houston was in 6 hours. He had time to dig deeper, to verify what his instincts were already telling him. He accessed the ISS's archive of radiation monitoring data, pulling up the South Atlantic anomaly's current status. The region had been stable for decades, a known hazard that crews planned around. Radiation levels peaked at approximately 20 millisieverts per hour during transit, enough to require minimizing time in that section of orbit, but not immediately dangerous. Then he checked yesterday's readings. The data made him read it twice to be certain he wasn't misinterpreting. Radiation in the South Atlantic anomaly had increased 340% in the last 3 weeks. The spike started on October 19th. The same day the Sentinel report appeared in the ISS computer system. The same coordinates where, 67 years earlier, something had waited in the darkness between Earth and stars, broadcasting mathematics while a capsule full of unconscious animals drifted past carrying evidence of biology that shouldn't exist. And according to the ISS's current orbital trajectory, the station would pass directly through the heart of the anomaly in exactly 7 hours and 13 minutes. For the first time in 14 months, their flight path would take them through that specific region of space. Travis understood then that the document appearing in his diagnostic report hadn't been an accident, a random glitch, or bureaucratic error. It was a warning, or possibly an invitation. Something was waiting in the South Atlantic anomaly, had been waiting there since 1958, and now, for reasons he couldn't begin to understand, it wanted to be found. The question that kept him awake for the remaining 2 hours of his sleep cycle was simpler and more terrifying. What happens when we pass through? Travis waited until the morning comm window at 0800 hours to make contact, but he didn't route through official NASA channels. Instead, he used the crew's personal email system to reach Dr. Ramona Castellanos, an astrobiologist at Johnson Space Center who'd been his training supervisor during pre-flight prep and someone he trusted to ask questions without triggering institutional alarms. His message was carefully worded, casual enough to avoid suspicion, but specific enough that Ramona would understand the gravity. He asked if she'd ever heard of Project Sentinel or a researcher named Vernon Huxley in relation to early biological space experiments. Then he waited. Her response came back 93 minutes later, faster than he'd expected. The message was brief. Nothing in public archives, checking restricted databases, stand by. 3 hours after that, during his scheduled exercise period on the Advanced Resistive Exercise device, his tablet chimed with a second message. This one was longer and written in the clipped, precise language Ramona used when something had genuinely disturbed her scientific worldview. She'd found Vernon Huxley's name in a cross-referenced footnote in a 1960 Air Force Space Medicine Division personnel roster. The notation indicated he'd been employed from 1954 until his death on March 7, 1959, at age 43. Cause of death listed as single-vehicle traffic accident on Route 1 near Cocoa Beach, Florida. But when Ramona pulled the accident report, details didn't align with a standard fatality investigation. The body had been transferred directly to Patrick Air Force Base instead of a civilian morgue. No autopsy was performed. The funeral was closed casket with no family members in attendance, which was unusual for a man who, according to earlier employment records, had a wife and 2 young daughters. There was no obituary in local papers, no death certificate filed with the state of Florida, and most significantly, Vernon's wife and children had relocated to Sacramento, California, within 2 weeks of his death with no forwarding address. They effectively vanished from public record. Ramona had found 3 other names connected to Project Sentinel through the same personnel cross-references. All 3 died between 1959 and 1960. All 3 deaths were classified as accidents. One drowned during a solo fishing trip despite being a competitive swimmer in college. Another died from carbon monoxide poisoning in his home despite living in Florida where heating systems were rarely used. The third fell from a hotel balcony in Washington, D.C. after attending what was described in police reports as a routine Defense Department briefing. Delbert Finch, the British radio telescope operator who detected the signal from Jodrell Bank, had a different fate. Ramona found a missing persons report filed by Finch's sister in Manchester, England, dated April 14, 1961. Finch had left his apartment one morning to walk to work, and never arrived. No body was ever recovered. The investigation was closed after 6 months, with no leads. His personal effects, including all of his observatory logs and technical notes, were confiscated by British Ministry of Defense officials 3 days after he disappeared. The official explanation was national security concerns related to his work tracking Soviet satellites, but the timing suggested something else entirely. Travis was processing this information when his tablet chimed again, but this notification wasn't from Ramona. It was a system message indicating he'd received a file via the ISS's secondary communication array, the backup channel used primarily for non-critical data transfers and crew personal communications. The sender's address was a string of numbers that didn't match NASA's standard format. He opened the message. The text was brief and unsigned. Protocol Sentinel remains active. South Atlantic anomaly has been under continuous monitoring since June 1958. No significant changes in 66 years, until 3 weeks ago. Radiation increase 340%. Signal pattern returned. 1,420 MHz. Fibonacci sequence. Same as 1957. They know you have the file. Delete everything. Now. Travis checked the message's routing data, something he'd learned to do during his Navy communications training. The transmission had originated from an IP address registered to Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado Springs, the location of NORAD's primary operations center, buried under 2,000 feet of granite and home to some of the most classified military surveillance systems in existence. Someone with access to deep military intelligence networks was monitoring the ISS, knew about the Sentinel report, and was concerned enough to break protocol by sending an unauthorized warning directly to his personal device. Before he could respond, every screen in the station's U.S. segment went dark simultaneously. Not a gradual shutdown, but an instant blackout, as if someone had thrown a switch. The station's primary computers rebooted, a process that normally required ground authorization and careful sequencing to avoid disrupting life support systems. Travis floated to the nearest control panel as the systems came back online. The status display showed a notification. Scheduled maintenance completed. All systems nominal. But Travis checked the maintenance schedule every morning as part of his duties as flight engineer. There was no maintenance planned. Not today, not this week, not for the next 37 days. He pulled up the orbital tracking display, something he'd looked at 1,000 times during his 15 years with NASA. The trajectory prediction showed the ISS's path over the next 72 hours. The familiar sinusoidal wave, as the station traced its path around Earth's curve. Then he saw it. In 7 hours and 11 minutes, at 15:43 Universal Time, the station would pass directly through the densest part of the South Atlantic anomaly. The orbital mechanics were complex, influenced by atmospheric drag, gravitational perturbations, and periodic reboost maneuvers. But the flight path through this specific region was rare. According to the mission timeline, this would be their first transit through the anomaly's core in 14 months and 8 days. The realization arrived with the cold clarity of vacuum. The Sentinel report hadn't appeared in his system by accident. It had been placed there, uploaded exactly 19 days before this orbital window, timed so he would find it, read it, understand it, and be watching when the station passed through the same coordinates where, 67 years ago, something had broadcast mathematics into the darkness while a capsule full of unconscious primates drifted past, carrying evidence of impossible biology. Vernon Huxley had documented first contact in 1957 and paid for that knowledge with his life and his family's erasure from history. Now, someone, either within NASA or the military, or some organization buried so deep that even their warnings came through encrypted channels from inside mountains, was giving Travis the same choice Vernon had faced: remain silent or bear witness. He had 7 hours to decide. But the truth was, he'd already decided the moment he copied that file to his personal drive. He would watch. He would document. And if something was waiting for them in the South Atlantic anomaly, something that had been patient enough to orbit in silence for 66 years, then humanity deserved to know what our first venture into space had actually found up here in the vast indifference of the cosmos. Travis positioned himself in the cupola at 15:36 Universal Time, 7 minutes before the station would enter the South Atlantic anomaly's densest radiation zone. The cupola was the station's observation module, a dome of 7 windows offering 360 degrees of Earth and space, normally used for monitoring approaching cargo vehicles or conducting Earth photography. Today, Travis had configured the high-resolution camera array to point away from Earth, toward the darkness of space above the South Atlantic. He'd told Kenji and Astrid he was documenting orbital sunrise for a time-lapse project. They'd nodded, without question. Astronauts respected each other's personal projects during downtime. The radiation monitor mounted near his shoulder began its characteristic clicking at 15:41 Universal Time, 2 minutes ahead of predicted entry. The dosimeter reading climbed from 0.03 millisieverts per hour to 0.17 in less than 90 seconds. Travis activated the camera recording system, checked the timestamp display, 15:43 and 14 seconds. The station crossed the invisible threshold into the anomaly. For the next 11 minutes, they would transit through a region of space where Earth's magnetic field thinned like worn fabric, where particles from the solar wind penetrated deeper than anywhere else in low Earth orbit, and where, if the pattern from 1957 held true, something had been waiting in patient silence for 66 years. The first 3 minutes passed without incident. Earth rotated below, the South Atlantic visible as a vast darkness interrupted by occasional lights from coastal cities in Brazil and Argentina. The stars above held their familiar positions, Orion visible near the horizon, the Milky Way's band cutting across the cupola's overhead window. Travis kept his breathing steady, controlled, the way Navy pilots are trained to maintain calm in the seconds before a carrier landing. The dosimeter clicked faster. 0.4, 2 millisieverts. 0.68, 1.13. At minute 4, the radiation spiked to 5.8 millisieverts per hour, 580% above normal levels for this orbital region. The increase was sharp enough that Travis's training screamed at him to move to a shielded area, to minimize exposure, but he remained at the window. His eyes adapted to the darkness beyond Earth's reflected light, searching the void for any variation in the star field, any movement, any indication of presence. Minute 6. The dosimeter peaked at 6.4 millisieverts and held steady. Then Travis saw it. Not with the camera first, but with his own eyes, the way Vernon Huxley's primates might have seen it through the capsule's small porthole in 1957. A shape against the stars, visible only because it blocked the light behind it. A negative space where cosmic background should be. Distance was impossible to judge in the absolute black of orbital space, but the station's proximity sensors, designed to detect debris as small as 10 centimeters, showed nothing. Whatever occupied that space, 400 meters from the ISS, didn't register on radar, didn't reflect radio waves, didn't emit heat, existed in some physical state that human instruments weren't calibrated to measure. Travis activated maximum zoom on the high-resolution camera, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of 15 years working in microgravity. The shape resolved into structure. Length approximately 60 meters, maybe slightly less, with bilateral symmetry that suggested design or biological purpose. The surface wasn't metallic. The texture reminded Travis of something organic, almost translucent in certain angles, with an underlying complexity that seemed to shift when observed directly, as if the object existed slightly out of phase with conventional matter. 3 rectangular openings ran along what Travis arbitrarily designated as the object's ventral surface, each approximately 2 meters wide and 6 meters long, emitting a faint blue-white luminescence that didn't behave like normal light. The glow didn't cast shadows, didn't reflect off the surrounding vacuum, simply existed as localized illumination that seemed to terminate at the opening's edges. The object matched the ISS's orbital velocity perfectly. 17,150 miles per hour relative to Earth's surface, 0 velocity relative to the station. No visible propulsion, no exhaust plume, no reaction mass ejection, no heat signature that would indicate engines or power generation. It simply moved through space with the station, maintaining an exact distance of 400 meters, compensating for every minor adjustment in the ISS's attitude, every tiny thruster firing, every subtle change in orbital mechanics caused by atmospheric drag or gravitational variations. The precision required to maintain that synchronization without visible thrust violated every principle of orbital dynamics that Travis had studied for 2 decades. At minute 8, the ISS began its gradual exit from the anomaly's core. The object's movement changed. It didn't accelerate dramatically or vanish in a burst of impossible speed. It simply stopped matching the station's velocity, allowing orbital mechanics to slowly increase the distance between them. Travis kept the camera locked on the shape as it receded, watching as the kilometers accumulated between observation and observed. Then, in the final seconds before the object dropped below visual resolution, one of the 3 rectangular openings changed. The blue-white luminescence dimmed, and the opening contracted from 2 meters to 1 meter to nothing, closing with the smooth, organic motion of an eyelid sliding shut over an eye. Travis reviewed the footage immediately, frame by frame, confirming what he'd witnessed. The opening had closed. Not a mechanical shutter, not blast doors, not any engineered system he could identify. It moved like living tissue, like something breathing or blinking, or simply choosing to stop observing after its curiosity had been satisfied. He checked the timestamp, 15:54 and 11 seconds. Exactly 11 minutes from entry to exit. He checked the external camera feeds from the station's hull-mounted arrays, the ones that continuously recorded 360 degrees of coverage for debris monitoring and operational documentation, Every single external camera showed identical error messages for the period between 1543 and 1554 Universal Time. 11 minutes of simultaneous failure across redundant systems. NASA would call it a software glitch, a cosmic ray strike that corrupted multiple recording systems simultaneously. A statistically improbable, but technically possible event. Travis opened a private message to Ramona, typing quickly before he could second-guess the decision. He described what he'd seen, attached his personal camera footage, and asked her to check current radiation levels in the South Atlantic anomaly. Her response came 14 minutes later. Radiation had returned to baseline normal levels as of 1600 hours Universal Time. The 340% spike that had persisted for 3 weeks had vanished completely, as if it had never existed. Whatever had been generating that radiation, whatever had been waiting in that specific volume of space, had either left or returned to whatever dormant state it had maintained for the previous 66 years. Travis returned to Vernon Huxley's report one final time, scrolling to the last page, a section he'd missed during his initial reading. A handwritten note in the margin, the ink slightly faded, but still legible, written in Vernon's careful script. They didn't arrive in 1957. The capsule woke them. They've been here much longer. Possibly since before we looked up and named the stars. Possibly always. Below that, another sentence, added later in darker ink. We are not the first intelligence in this solar system. We are simply the newest. And the question we must ask is not whether they are watching us. The question is, what are they waiting for? Travis looked out the cupola window at Earth rotating below, at the thin blue line of atmosphere that separated human civilization from the infinite dark, at the stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless worlds across billions of years. Somewhere in that vast geometry of space and time, something organic and patient and utterly alien maintained its vigil, watching our small blue world with purposes we couldn't begin to understand. Vernon Huxley had seen it in 1957 and carried that knowledge to his grave. Travis had seen it today and knew, with the cold certainty of physics and orbital mechanics, that he wouldn't be the last. The ISS continued its endless fall around Earth, 17,000 miles per hour through an ocean of vacuum, and 400 meters away, in a direction no instrument could measure. Something ancient and unknowable closed its eye and waited for us to understand what our presence in space had truly awakened.